I mean, I knew Warlocks were good, mechanically, that is, but I think I might have underestimated them. By the end of the build today, you just might find the hardest hitting single class character in all of D&D, who surprisingly does an incredible amount of damage while simultaneously shutting down potentially multiple enemies. Welcome to hell. Welcome to D4. Hey everybody, so here at D4 every week I take a deep dive into character builds for my favorite role-playing games. I like to crunch numbers about them, I like to theory craft about them, not so that I can tell you the right or the best way to play a character, but to explore one way to build a character in the hopes of creating something that's fun but also powerful to play. So if you also enjoy creating characters for your favorite role-playing games, or if you really enjoy theory crafting, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on how to build something that you're thinking about playing, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I am really glad you're here. So thanks for watching. My name's Colby. So here's the thing about Warlocks. Even though their spell levels scale at the same rate as full casters, like wizards and clerics and bards, because of the extremely limited number of spell slots they get, only 2 for most of their career at the levels most of us generally play at anyways, you have to play them very differently than other casters, right? Even though they get those spell slots back on a short rest. I know this isn't much of a newsflash for veterans, but I think it's worth analyzing a bit when we try to think about how we might want to build a warlock. Most full casters can, relatively early on in their adventuring career, get to a point where they basically can be casting a spell-slotted spell every round. That's less the case for tables who experience like 4 or more combat encounters per long rest, but that kind of playstyle tends to be the exception at most tables these days, I think, rather than the norm, right? But with Warlocks, you're probably only wanting to cast a single non-cantrip spell per combat encounter most of the time. What I think that ends up meaning is that to get the most out of them, mechanically anyways, you typically are wanting to just find like the most potent or useful concentration spell that will last ideally the rest of the combat encounter, cast that, and then otherwise make weapon attacks or cast cantrips on your other turns. And fortunately for Warlocks, they have really great tools to do both of those things quite well, especially in 5.5, even though we don't yet have a Hexblade subclass, and when we do get one, it looks like it'll be a lot less powerful, which I don't think is a bad thing for the record. The new Pact of the Blade and other invocations like Devouring Blade make a Gishy Spellsword Warlock like this, or sure, Spellbow Warlock like this, right? Better than ever. And you can use Charisma for your attack and spell stat and just really excel in every way. And on the cantrip side, of course, Warlocks get what's arguably the most powerful cantrip in the game, Helldritch Blast. It's fantastic for a number of reasons. It fires multiple beams as it scales rather than just doing additional damage with a single hit, right? Thus letting it take advantage of add damage to an attack, spells, and abilities. And you can also get some great invocations to further buff it. Between the two paths, though, weapons, Eldritch Blast, I tend to think that the Gishy weapon-using Warlock has a slight edge when it comes to damage. Thanks largely to the great ways that you can improve weapon damage, especially in 5.5 with weapon masteries, but also with fighting styles and feats, to say nothing of the power of magical weapons in D&D, right? Especially as you get into higher tiers of play. That said, as I've been thinking about how to build a single-class, no multi-classing Warlock for this single-class build series that I've been doing for the last few months, I decided I wanted to forego the weapon route and focus on Eldritch Blast, for a few reasons. First, I already did a full Warlock Gish build. It was the first build that I did for 5.5, not counting the early access preview for the Assassin that I did before the books came out, right? I linked to it earlier, that Pact of the Blade Warlock. And that build, not surprisingly, is still a tier 1 build for damage, even a year and a half later. Sure, it did use some things from older books, so it isn't exactly a fit for this series. It could be updated, but it's close enough that I didn't want to just kind of redo it and mostly repeat myself. But the second reason for this decision, remember, the goals for these builds are twofold. One, build a character that's kind of really good at just doing what we kind of generally think the class should be good at doing, first and foremost, right? But then 2, try to optimize damage within that initial essential framework. As for what a Warlock should be good at doing, I'd say generally being a kind of caster damage dealer with potent control potential, maybe a little utility, maybe even the potential to be a party face with their high charisma, right? And the thing about building around weapon damage rather than spell damage as a Warlock, especially in 5.5, is that despite Pact of the Blade letting us make attacks with our charisma, you can't really be super sad, like single ability score dependent, right? And buff your charisma and do all the things you want to do to improve weapon damage, especially if you can't multi-class, right? Because we would for sure want to pick up Great Weapon Master as a feat, whether we're ranged or melee, and that requires a 13 strength, and it bumps our strength, right, rather than charisma as a half feat, meaning we'd be sitting at +3 to our charisma or worse until level 8, which is close to the end of the campaign, if not past it, for a lot of us. That would mean our spell DC for our great control spells, among other things, would be less than optimal for a really long time. What's more, if we can't multiclass, we have no way of getting fighting styles, which can be really important for weapon users, ranged weapon users especially. And if we wanted a weapon mastery, which of course we would, we'd have to sacrifice yet another feat for it. That would still not bump our charisma, right? So yeah, if I can start with a level in fighter to save myself a feat and pick up armor proficiency, constitution saving throw proficiency, a fighting style, and weapon masteries, I think the Gish route is for sure the hardest hitting Warlock. But confined like I am for this build to no multiclassing, I think building around Eldritch Blast is the better path to making sure that your damage is still really solid while also being like the best Warlock you can be, at least through the couple first tiers of play. After that, maybe you could have your cake and eat it too and move over to weapons, but we'll talk about that when we get there. Plus, I mean, it's been a really long time since I've done a build based on Eldritch Blast, like over a year, right up here. And that build was mostly a sorcerer anyways. So let's jump in to D&D build number 244, Highway to Hell. The Devil Went Down to Faerun. Beelzebub's Blaster. Warlock and Load. The Hurt Locker. These are some clever ones. Dark One's Blasting. Blasty McBlastface. Oh, thanks as always to the Discord community for the wonderful suggestions. I think this week I've got to go with Rad1228's suggestion, the Helldritch Blaster. Big thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton for the fantastic artwork that he put together for the build this week. He does this every week. He's so talented. If you'd be interested in following Randall to check out the other art that he does, or to maybe even try and commission him to create some art for your character or even your entire party, I will put links in the video description, as always, on how to do so. And I do not have a sponsor this week, and so let me just maybe give a quick plug. I've got merch. I'd love it if you'd check it out. In the video description, there's links. There's some pretty cool and I think funny and or maybe kind of wholesome t-shirts there that I think do a pretty good job of capturing the feel of some of the channel stuff and some of my favorite quotes. Maybe I'll start wearing them when I don't have sponsors, just to kind of show you what they look like. There's the Welcome Home candle. There's the Dice soap. So yeah, if you see something there that you like, picking something up for yourself or a friend would be a nice way to support me. So thanks for considering. At level 1 for our only class, we're going Warlock. As for our species, I think I'm probably going to go Goliath. I know, it's the new custom lineage, right? But like I always say, any species can work great here. I think for an Eldritch Blast Warlock, there's a lot of potential to couple some kind of soft control with our damage that's super effective in combat. And that control and debuffing is even better if we can tack on some slow to our attacks. If we could use older content, we could get the Lance of Lethargy evocation to help us do that, which would be awesome. But if we're limiting ourselves to the 5.5 Player's Handbook, going Goliath here and taking either the Frost ancestry or the Hill Giant ancestry would let us proficiency bonus times per day, add a d6 of cold damage to an attack in the case of Frost, right? Any attack, doesn't have to be a weapon, but then also slow them by 10 feet for a round. Or, knock them prone in the case of the Hill Giant, which Since it costs you half your speed to stand up, once you're prone would typically be an even bigger way to slow your targets, right? You pick here. Ranged attacks have disadvantage against prone enemies, which could potentially be problematic for us. You'd have to kind of decide when to try and knock them prone, and you'd want to wait till you make your final attack, right? Plus, I like the extra little bit of damage we get from frost, so I probably lean that way, but either's great. And any other species can be great here too. My second pick would probably be human for an additional origin feat, but you do what you think best here. As for our background, as always I say, grab an old one and customize it if you can, or, just make a custom background as per the guidelines we get in the Dungeon Master's Guide. But if you can't or don't want to do those things, Merchant will work just fine for us, since it gives us the ability score increases we want, and my favorite origin feat, which, is lucky again. I love on-demand advantage, and I'm not sorry, but if you'd rather get alert or tough or musician or magic initiate or whatever else, go for it, you'll be fine. As for our starting ability scores, assuming the point buy method as always, I'm going to say let's go 15 charisma, take a +2 there, a 15 constitution and a +1, and then a 14 dexterity. Alternatively, if you're going for the late game, you might want to consider dropping that constitution and getting yourself a 13 strength. We'll talk more about that later, much later. As for starting equipment, really all we need is some good studded leather. Beyond basic adventuring gear, spell focus, etc. Warlocks get at least light armor proficiency, so better than nothing, but you probably want to avoid melee as much as possible still. As a Warlock 1 then, we get some spells, and there are plenty that I'd love to have. Blade Ward is a nice concentration cantrip now to give enemies a -d4 on attacks against you. Pretty solid defensive move. Armor of Agathis would give us temporary hit points and return damage when we get hit in melee, right? I love Bane for a -d4 to attacks and saves debuff for enemies, and Hideous Laughter is solid single target control, but for damage we'd probably want to be concentrating on Hex right now to do an extra d6 of damage to our attacks, and the bonus action to transfer it still makes me sad, but it doesn't hurt much at early levels anyways. And then, yes, there's that most quintessential of Warlock spells, Eldritch Blast, which fires a beam of force damage, generally the best damage type in the game from a resistance and immunity standpoint, right? Up to 120 feet away, and at level 5 it fires 2 beams, 3 at level 11, 4 at 17. That's awesome. Finally, at level 1, we get our first Eldritch Invocation. I love them all. We don't have a lot of options to choose from at level 1, but I think I'd grab Pact of the Chain here, letting us summon a familiar, like the Find Familiar spell, but with lots of cool extra options for us to summon. For now, I'd just be sure to grab a familiar who can go invisible so that they can take the help action, granting hopefully us or maybe someone else advantage on our attack against that enemy. But then, if they're invisible, they can stay relatively safe since they can't be seen. No opportunity attacks against enemies that you can't see, right? So unless the enemy can see invisible creatures, their likelihood of staying alive is much higher. At level 2, we get Magical Cunning, which lets us, once per long rest, recover half of our spent spell slots with just a 1-minute little ritual, right? It's nice in a dungeon crawl-like situation where you just don't have an hour to safely do a short rest. But then we also get 2 more Eldritch Invocations, and I think we got to go with the 2 that are going to buff our Eldritch Blast. Agonizing Blast to add our Charisma modifier to the damage. Pretty unique for cantrips, that, outside of True Strike, right? And one of the things that makes this cantrip so good. And then Repelling Blast, so that when we hit with Eldritch Blast, we can push a large or smaller enemy 10 feet away from us. And remember, there's no limit to how often this works per turn or anything. So if we fire 2 beams eventually, each of them can push 10 feet. It's really nice. And there's no save against that push either, just the size limit. I really wish that they would have included Lance of Lethargy especially, and also Grasp of Hadar as invocations in this player's handbook so that we could slow and pull enemies with our Eldritch Blast to boot. But if you're stuck with 5.5 only, this is what we got. And it'll be enough for us. Don't worry. You know who really just takes all of my worries away? My channel members and patrons. quick shout out to you guys. Thank you so much for your support. You make D4 possible, and I'm so grateful for that. If you're not a member or a patron, I'd love it if you'd consider becoming one. There's a button down there that says join. Click on it or check the video description for a link to the Patreon, where it'll tell you about all of the perks that are available to my members. And I offer all perks to all members, regardless of the level they sign up at, so long as they sign up at like silver or higher, which is just $2 a month. I just ask that you pay what you think you can afford and or what you think it's worth. Those perks include access to the library of write-ups that I do for each of my builds to help you recreate it yourself a little more easily, access to the community Discord server, and access to the live monthly Q&A hangout sessions that we have. If you don't want to support the channel in this way or don't feel like you can afford it or whatever, that's fine. I'm grateful that you're here, watching, liking, subscribing. All those things are also super helpful for me, so thanks. At level 3, we get our Warlock subclass, and I think I want to go with that most quintessential Warlock of them all, the Fiend. Now, I will say that really any subclass can work well here. Celestial to add some support potential, mostly. A great old one for some psychic flavor and power. Archfey might work best with kind of the core concept mechanically, thanks to the teleportation. And I mean, plus that's just fun and awesome, but Fiend is definitely the best damage option, at least once we hit level 7 and beyond. And they probably have the best survivability benefits of all the subclass options as well, and since we're not multiclassing and only had our paltry light armor and no constitution saving throw proficiency, that felt like the best move to keep us a little more well-rounded and on our feet and concentrating. So feel free to go another route, but we are making a pact with the devil, or, well, a demon. Not the same thing, I know. Anyways, as such, at level 3, we get the Dark One's Blessing feature, which says when we reduce an enemy to 0 hit points, we just automatically gain temporary hit points equal to our charisma modifier plus our Warlock level. Some nice scaling there. And better yet, in 5.5, we get the same benefit if someone else kills an enemy within 10 feet of us. That's really nice and should do great things to keep us healthy. We're going to have temporary hit points, I feel like, kind of most of the time. Granted, if we're at ranged, we might be less likely to get that benefit when an ally kills an enemy, but still. We also get second level spells here, and Fiend locks get Burning Hands, Command, Scorching Ray, and Suggestion for free. All pretty decent spells for either damage or control, right? Just what a Warlock does best. But beyond that, I'd want to grab Misty Step for teleporting, right? Mirror Image is a great defensive move. Hold Person to paralyze humanoids anyways, super strong. But perhaps above all, Darkness and Cloud of Daggers. So no, I'm not going today with the old, cast darkness on yourself and then attack enemies from within that darkness, so you have advantage and they have disadvantage tactic that I've used plenty of times in the past. Not that I don't think it would work pretty well here most of the time, especially since we're ranged and thus would be less likely to make life difficult for our allies with that bubble of darkness. But no, it's really because I think there will be better things for us to be concentrating on instead before long. But if you did want to do that, or just felt like you'd like to have the option to have a big bubble of darkness once in a while for whatever reason, then go for it. It's a spell I used to use a ton in builds, but that I've really gotten away from in 5.5 because of the way that it's changed. It still puts a 5-foot cube of spinning blades down that deals 4d4 damage to enemies inside and scales nicely when upcast. But the challenge now is that it only does that damage when an enemy first touches the area, whether you push them into it, or you conjure it over them, or they walk in of their own free will. I don't know why they would, or if they end their turn there. It used to be when they started their turn, right? And thus pushing them into the area would pretty much guarantee that they'd take damage from the spell twice in a round. But since we don't have the capability to just straight up immobilize them in the cloud, on this build anyways, then the total damage potential from the spell isn't what it used to be. I do appreciate that you can teleport the cube up to 30 feet with your action now, that's new, and I still think it would be better than Hex for our concentration, especially in a small room where pushing them into the effect with Eldritch Blast would be more likely, right? So I'd keep it as an option, I think, but we'll get something better in a couple of levels. At level 4, we get our first general feat, and I want to grab a half feat that's going to raise our charisma by 1. Warcaster is of course a great choice, But we will get an invocation later that can give us advantage on concentration checks, and that's kind of the main thing that I want out of Warcaster, so feels like it's a little bit of a waste, potentially. I think instead I'd rather grab Spell Sniper here. This lets us ignore half and 3/4 cover on our ranged spell attacks, but also keeps us from having disadvantage on our ranged spell attacks when an enemy is close by, and that's going to be handy for all of us, really, at least some of the time. I love the idea of like an enemy getting, up close and personal and us just essentially like putting a hand on their chest and like blasting them 10 feet away without suffering disadvantage for doing so. Increasing our ranged spell attacks by 60 feet is pretty cool too, right? The feat does that as well. 180 foot distance on Eldritch Blast. That's nice. At level 5, we get 2 more invocations. So many invocations. I love it. So, okay. There are a few I'd like to have here, actually. As I said, if you can get Lance of Lethargy from the old books, I'd probably prioritize that, since putting an additional snare on enemies would be awesome. And if we could couple that with a Frost Giant snare, it would make keeping enemies close to our Cloud of Daggers, anyways, a lot easier, right? That said, there are 2 other invocations I'd really love to have. First up, Devil's Sight. Wait a minute, you said you weren't going to do that stupid darkness thing. You liar. Hold your horses. I'm not. Not really. But Goliaths don't have dark vision, do they? And in a minute, we are going to talk about a spell that we'd really want to have dark vision for. So yeah, I'd for sure consider this. I'd probably prioritize it, since being able to see in dim light and in magical and non-magical darkness out to 120 feet is pretty great for anyone to have. But I'd also consider Investment of the Chainmaster here. It basically buffs our familiar in a few great ways. It gives them a fly or swim speed. It lets their bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage be necrotic or radiant if we want. It uses your spell save DC if they do something that forces an enemy to make a save. That's potentially pretty awesome. It lets you spend your reaction to give them resistance to damage if they take some damage. And then it lets you spend your bonus action to let them take the attack action, instead of giving up one of your own attacks, as was always the case for us with Pact of the Chain, right? And that bonus action attack is probably the thing I'm most interested in for purposes of this build, though I'm not 100% sure I'd be trying to use it all the time, despite their now improved defenses that they have from this invocation. Let's talk about when I would want to do that as we discuss 3rd level spells. So Fiendlocks get Stinking Cloud and Fireball for free. And I mean, yeah, Fireball especially is amazing. A Stinking Cloud can be a great debuff if the enemies aren't immune to the poisoned condition. And beyond that, of course, I'd want to consider Counterspell and or Dispel Magic, to shut down casters and spell effects. Fear and or Hypnotic Pattern, of course, for some great, AoE control. But the 2 that I think I'd probably want to really sort of build around here would be, well, first up, Hunger of Hadar. This is a spell I just fall in love with more every day, and I think it's perfect for our Warlocky selves. Not just conceptually, as it summons a 20-foot radius sphere of darkness infused with unspeakable horrors from the far realm, but also mechanically, as it both blinds enemies inside, makes the area difficult terrain, so it's hard for them to get out, and does damage. 2d6 cold damage when they start their turn in the area, one of the few AoE spells that does that now. It deals damage at the beginning of their turn, right? And there's no save against that damage, by the way, which is fantastic. And if they end their turn in the area, they have to make a dexterity save or take 2d6 acid damage as well from tentacles. Ew. The scaling isn't great when upcast. You only get 1d6 more cold or acid damage, not both. You choose, so I'd suggest cold, since it's a lot more likely that an enemy will take that damage, right? But it's still a nice damage plus control and debuff spell that is perfect for us. And yeah, it's even better than the Darkness Devil's Sight thing, because while it now very clearly specifies that the enemies inside are blinded, if you've got dark vision, even normal dark vision, right? It doesn't say that the area is magical darkness like the darkness spell does. That spell specifies that normal dark vision can't penetrate the darkness. This spell doesn't say that. Even if it did, we have Devil's Sight. I'm just thinking of our allies, right? But yeah, if you've got dark vision, you can see the enemies that are inside. They can't see you because they're blinded. meaning everyone who can see them has advantage on attacks against those inside, and those enemies have disadvantage on their attacks against us until they get out of the spell's area. Fantastic. That said, yeah, there's another potentially really great spell we might want to concentrate on here, and it is Summon Undead. A lot of you have been asking for this for quite some time, so let's get into it. Summon Undead works the same as just about all of these summon spells now, right? Summons a creature who goes on your turn, but right after you, doesn't require your bonus action to command them or anything, and they do damage and often other stuff. With the Undead Spirit here, we choose if it's a ghostly, skeletal, or putrid spirit, and we're going putrid. Putrid Undead Spirit can make a number of attacks equal to half the spell's level rounded down, so just 1 for now. It's not great damage, it's 1d6 plus 3 plus the spell's level, but then it has this amazing little rider. If the target has the poisoned condition, they are paralyzed until the end of their next turn. Yeah, paralyzed. Automatically, no saving throw. Dang. Now, there are some kinks here to work out. First of all, a lot of enemies, and I mean a lot, are immune to the poisoned condition. There are 119 of them in the monster manual. That's almost a quarter of them. And then even if they're not immune to the condition, well, we gotta get them poisoned for this to work, right? The Undead Spirit themselves forces enemies who start their turn within 5 feet of it to make a save or they're poisoned. But yeah, this and most things that can poison unfortunately allow for a Constitution saving throw. Not great. But we, as a Pact of the Chain Warlock, we have a nice little familiar that could get the job done quite nicely. Yeah, I'm talking about that tiny little demon, undoubtedly a messenger from our patron, the Quasit. The Quasit can make an attack that does 1d4 plus 3 damage. It's not much, but if it hits, the target is just automatically poisoned until the start of the Quasit's next turn. So yes, the play here would be to have your Quasit attack first and poison the enemy, and then the Putrid Undead Spirit to attack and automatically paralyze them. And paralysis is incredibly devastating. They're incapacitated, they can't move, and all attacks against them have advantage, and attacks from within 5 feet are automatically critical hits. One little wrinkle here though. Technically, both our familiar, who can attack with our bonus action now if we took the invocation from it, and our Putrid Spirit take their turn after us. And if the enemy's paralyzed, they'd only be so until the end of their turn, meaning we couldn't take advantage of that paralysis unless we held our action. So here's what we'd potentially do. Step 1, use our bonus action to have our Quasit attack. Then if it hits, step 2, run up next to the enemy and hold our action so that we go after our Putrid Spirit attacks. Step 3, Putrid Spirit attacks, potentially paralyzing the enemy, and at that point, we would use our reaction to fire Helldritch Blast at point blank range, assuming we took Spell Sniper, right, to automatically crit on both blasts since it fires 2 beams now, level 5. That's complicated, and not necessarily guaranteed to work. Both our pets need to land their attacks, and the Quasit only has a +5 to hit. So when I crunch numbers here in a minute, which tactic do I assume we're using? The auto paralysis tactic or just use Hunger of Hadar? Well, if everything went according to plan and the enemy was just paralyzed every single round, the Quasit Putrid Spirit route is more damage than pushing an enemy into Hunger of Hadar. But surprisingly, not by that much. It's only about 10% better, assuming that we otherwise use a familiar to just make an attack with our bonus action otherwise. More on that in a second. Add to that the fact that it just won't work a lot of the time, whether because the enemy isn't poisoned when the spirit attacks, or the spirit themselves misses, or the enemy is just immune to the poisoned condition, right? And it feels like kind of tough to just build around and make assumptions for. If we assume, for example, that the enemy is only going to be paralyzed 50% of the time, then the Hunger of Hadar route is going to actually do more damage on average. Of course, sure, that's not accounting for how much your entire party would benefit from a paralyzed enemy, right? If you've got 1 or 2 hard-hitting melee allies especially, then yeah, the Quasit Putrid Spirit route is going to be awesome. So I'm just going to assume that we're going the Hunger of Hadar route. The multi-target damage and debuff and control potential there is really nice, right? But keep this auto paralysis tactic in your back pocket and pull it out if you're confident the enemy isn't immune to poison. have fun with it. It might not be amazing for the Fiendlock blaster that we're building today, but I'll build around it one day with something a little better suited to take advantage. At level 6, as a Fiendlock, we get Dark One's own luck, which lets us, charisma modifier times per day, add a d10 to an ability check or saving throw that we make. That's pretty fantastic, especially for those of us who couldn't start with a level in Fighter and still don't have that Eldritch Mind invocation. Yeah, this should help a bunch. But at level 6, it's time for our first damage report. Okay, here's what combat would ideally, I think, look like for us at this level. On round 1, I'd want to cast Hunger of Hadar over as many enemies as possible, and then I'd use my bonus action, this round and every round really, to make an attack with my familiar against an enemy that is, ideally inside that darkness. Which familiar should we use? Our best bet is going to be the Imp, I think. Unfortunately, the Imp is a melee attacker, meaning that they would have to fly into Hunger of Hadar, and would thus be blinded, meaning they wouldn't have advantage on their attack. They wouldn't have disadvantage either, right? The Imp is blinded, so, the advantage and the disadvantage cancel each other out, yeah. And keep in mind, the damage from Hunger of Hadar doesn't take effect unless a character starts their turn in the area or ends their turn in the area. So if they fly in and fly out, they're going to be fine. Now, we could have a familiar that has dark vision make ranged attacks from outside, like the skeleton, or have something with blind sight fly in and attack, like the pseudo dragon or venomous snake, and that way, they'd get advantage. But the Imp just hits so much harder than the others that I think it's worth giving up the advantage. And yeah, again, they can fly in and out without taking an opportunity attack, because if the enemy's blinded, they can't see them. So they should be able to stay relatively safe, especially since they've got some additional survivability from our investment of the Chainmaster invocation. Anyways, on subsequent turns, we would simply fire off 2 Eldritch Blasts at a target that we could hopefully shove back in or shove deeper into the waiting arms of our tentacles, adding a d6 from our Frost Giant Goliath feature to the first one that hits and slowing them, and also doing 2d6 extra damage on the creature's turn thanks to Hunger of Hadar, which will hopefully impact multiple enemies, though I'm just going to assume that we're damaging 1 when I crunch numbers. I'm not going to assume that we're doing the acid damage from Hunger of Hadar, though. I mean, if we've got them in the middle of the tentacles and they're slowed, it won't be easy for monsters to get out, but if they dashed, they could. And the great thing about that is that, that means they're probably doing nothing or not much on their turn except trying to stay alive, which against us, they will be doing a poor job of indeed. For the record, between our luck points and ideally making attacks against blinded enemies, I'm just going to assume that we've got advantage on our Eldritch Blast attacks. It's an imperfect assumption, but I think it's close enough. And so, averaged over a 4-round combat encounter. Against enemies with a 10 AC here, we would do 36 damage per round, and against a 15 AC, we would average 31 DPR. And, that's decent, but not great. Compared to other builds built for damage, right? At this level, that's tier 3 territory, and compared to the other single class builds that I've done to date, that's dead last, except when compared to the more realistic numbers of the Doom Scroller Rogue from a couple of weeks ago, who was only doing that double true strike shtick once per combat encounter. Did I oversell this? I was talking about how crazy this damage was going to be. Hold your horses, we'll get there. Now, if we would have just gone all out on a 2-handed Pact of the Blade build here instead, grabbing Great Weapon Master at level 4, maybe using Hex for concentration and our familiar and luck points to give us advantage, even adding an Eldritch Smite if we crit, average damage in that scenario is significantly better, maybe as much as 30% better. So sure, if that's the route you want to go for it. Or sure, throw out a fireball or 2 with our spell slots, or lean more heavily into control with Hypnotic Pattern or Fear. But this is the first of these single class builds that I've done, I think, that is doing both single target damage and laying down some fairly decent debuffing and control at the same time. And that's kind of the great thing about this, right? We've got a ton of incredible options. Right at level 6, strong AoE potential, solid multi-target control, solid multi-target debuffing with some single target damage, or if we wanted to go the Quasit Putrid Spirit route, some amazing single target control and damage potential anyways. So I don't feel bad about our single target damage here at all. And guess what? It's about to get a lot better. At level 7, we get another Eldritch Invocation, just one though, and yeah, I think it's time to finally grab Eldritch Mind here for sure if you haven't yet, to give us advantage on our concentration checks, much appreciated. We also get 4th level spells here, and Fiendlocks get Fire Shield and Wall of Fire for free. Fire Shield can be a nice way to further deter enemies from hitting you, returning damage like Armor of Agathis. Those are really fun to combine. But the more important one for us will be, Wall of Fire. I have, interestingly, never built around this spell, ever, I don't think. But it's really good. So you cast Wall of Fire in a 60-foot line or a ring up to 20 feet in diameter, right? Not radius, 20 feet total from end to end. Smaller than Hunger of Hadar then. But enemies who enter the wall for the first time on a turn or end their turn within 10 feet of the hot side, you pick which side is hot when you cast it, take 5d8 damage, no save. They get to make a save if they're in the wall when it first appears, but otherwise when they pass through it or end their turn within 10 feet, it's just automatic damage. So we could now, potentially, create a ring of fire, right? Push enemies through it on our turn with Eldritch Blast, and then when they either run back through it on theirs or just sit there helplessly until their turn is over, they're going to take 5d8 more if we put the hot side on the inside. No save against that damage either time. Hooray for double damage per round concentration spells. Now, the debuffing and the control with Wall of Fire isn't quite as good, probably, as Hunger of Hadar, right? Though the wall is opaque, so they can't see through it. And, you could make it 60 feet long instead of create the ring, which would probably make potentially multiple enemies waste at least one turn, like trying to get around it if they didn't want to take the damage for running through it. So it potentially provides some control still. And you can always try and push them back through if they do run around or run out. For our next damage report, I'm going to assume that's what we're doing, since it will look better for our numbers, but you can still go with Hunger of Hadar if you want. Yay for options. Beyond that, for 4th level spells, while Banishment, Dimension Door, and more are all worth considering, I'm just going to say PYF here, pick your favorite for, which ones you take, since none of them are going to be things that I necessarily plan on using during combat. At level 8, we get another general feat, and I think we just got to bump our charisma, cap it to 20. It's just going to make everything we do a little bit better. Taking a couple more charisma-based half feats wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but yeah. At level 9, we get Contact Patron, which says that we always have the Contact Other Plane spell prepared, can cast it once per day without spending a spell slot to contact our patron specifically. And when we do so, we auto-succeed on the save that it requires, right? So that we don't take a bunch of damage and get struck incapacitated for the rest of the day, potentially. Eesh, that spelled nasty. We also get another Eldritch Invocation here, and I think that I would take Visions of Distant Realms so that we can cast Arcane Eye without spending a spell slot. It's an awesome way to send an invisible scout out to see what's coming. To be fair, an Imp Familiar, right, could basically already do this. This just feels a little less risky to me. Feel free to grab something else if you'd rather. Free Levitate or False Life or Pact of the Tomb, lots of great options. And then, we also get 5th level spells at 9th level. It's the level that just keeps on giving. Fiendlocks get Gesh and Insect Plague for free, both potentially useful, but beyond that, Hold Monster for more paralysis power, Synaptic Static for fireball-like damage and area, but with a debuff rider. I love that spell so much. Or maybe even the new Jalarzi's Storm of Radiance. It's a 10-foot radius, 40-foot high cylinder that blinds and deafens anyone inside, prevents spells with verbal components from being cast inside, and it's another potential push into hazard, dealing 4d10 radiant and thunder damage. Similar to Moonbeam then in a lot of ways, but it's a small area, can't be moved later if need be, and doesn't slow enemies down either. Hunger of Hadar upcast here does 4d6 damage instead of 4d10, so just a teeny bit less, but feels like we can more reliably get enemies inside and help keep them there too. And, Wall of Fire, by contrast, does a lot more damage. So I think we just continue using one of those two for our concentration. So why did you even talk about it? That's a new spell, I don't know. Anyways, at level 9, it's time for our next damage report. Since last check, we've capped our charisma, but our tactics will potentially change pretty significantly here. I'd say on round 1 now we're just laying down Wall of Fire, hitting as many enemies as possible with it, whether in a ring or a line. As a 5th level spell, that's 6d8 fire damage, half on a dex save. And I'm going to assume that they've got a 50% chance to make their save against it, as I always do. I am not going to assume that our imp is making attacks anymore, however. They're immune to fire, so they actually could pass through the wall, smack them, and then fly back out, right? But that means they'll probably take an opportunity attack and we're probably gonna die. So I'm just gonna keep them invisible to take the help action, help me get advantage instead. On subsequent turns though, we just do what we were doing before. Fire off our Eldritch Blasts, slowing and pushing our target, this time back through Wall of Fire. And I'll just assume that the enemy on their turn is just running through the wall, whether because they don't want to run around the line or because they're inside the ring and are gonna take damage anyways if they just end their turn there, right? If the hot side's on the inside and it's only 20 feet, well, you're always going to be within 10 feet of the hot side. There is some trickiness here in that if we push them through with our first blast, then we won't be able to see them for our next one, right? The wall's opaque. So if they're within 10 feet of the wall when we open fire, just maybe don't push them with the first attack, which is risky since you might miss with the second, but we want to be able to hit them a couple of times. Or, you could just find a second target to attack with that second beam. I mean, heck, you might even be able to push 2 of them through the wall and then you're gonna do amazing damage. I'm just assuming that if we hit, we are pushing them through, though I appreciate that won't necessarily be the case 100% of the time. If we do though, it'll be a total of 12d8 damage per round from Wall of Fire alone. And yeah, it's possible we could be doing damage to multiple enemies here, like I said, likely even, at least on the first round. But I'll just assume single target damage as always, and if we end up doing more total damage than I'm reporting on, well, hey, I don't sandbag often, so I'm okay with that. But now, averaged over a 4-round combat encounter against enemies with a 10 AC, we would do 82 damage per round on average, and against a 16 AC, it would be 80 DPR. That's more like it. Way better, more than double since last check. Whew. Compared to other DPR builds that I've done to date, that is like tier 1 territory for sure. And compared to other single class builds, we have a new leader for single target damage, baby. All from a pure Warlock Eldritch Blaster, and still bringing a bit of control to the party while we're at it. All right, so let's see what tier 3 of play looks like, shall we? At level 10, as a Fiend Lock, we get Fiendish Resilience, which just gives us a free resistance to any single damage type other than force. And we can change the damage type that we're resistant to with just a short or long rest. Pretty nice. I'd probably go Bludgeoning by default. I think that's still the most common damage type for monsters, unless you knew that you were going to be going up against something else with a different damage type, right? But yeah, I appreciate the versatility. At level 11, we get a 6th level Mystic Arcanum, and remember, we do not get a 6th level spell slot to cast this with. Our spell slots are sadly done progressing. With the Mystic Arcanum, we get to choose one spell of this level, right, and one spell only, though we can replace it with a different spell of this level when we gain a Warlock level. We get to cast it once per long rest. I'm just going to say PYF here, pick your favorite, but I think my personal favorite is Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron. It's just super adaptable, Lets you craft a bunch of common or even uncommon potions that you and your friends can use, and I love the idea of having lots of potential solutions to a variety of problems. An Oil of Slipperiness potion would give everyone who drank it the Freedom of Movement spell for 8 hours. That's a 4th level spell for probably your entire party. Fire Breath would be fun. Giant Strength could be useful if you had someone that could really benefit from a 21 Strength, right? Potion of Growth for your weapon users. Potion of Resistance if you knew you were going up against a particular damage type. Water Breathing if you gotta swim underwater, or just greater healing potions when all else fails. I love it. Don't forget, Eldritch Blast fires 3 beams now at level 11, and we get a 3rd spell slot that resets per short rest. 3 5th level spell slots on a short rest is awesome. At level 12, we get another feat, and this one isn't an easy choice for me. My initial thought was to take Moderately Armored, so I could equip some nice half-plate now, but you know what? The Moderately Armored feat doesn't give shield proficiency as well. It's just medium armor. That's messed up. Because the Lightly Armored feat does, but we don't need light armor proficiency. We already have it. This seriously feels like an oversight on WotC's part to me. I would 100% talk this over with my DM and ask if I could get shield proficiency from the Moderately Armored feat. It's a total slap in the face. If not, Or maybe even if it could, Resilient Constitution is for sure worth considering here to get Constitution and Concentration saving throw proficiency. I'd also consider Mage Slayer for sure to help break the concentration of magic users, but better yet, just auto-succeed on a failed Wisdom, Intelligence, or Charisma save. Legendary Resistance is good. We get that once per short rest. But here's one more to consider, Weapon Master. I know, it probably seems crazy at this point, but maybe not. I mean, okay, we do get another invocation at this level, and I would typically just kind of say PYF here, but what if we instead took Pact of the Blade? You've lost it, dude. At level 12, here's what I'm thinking. I didn't really want to go with weapons early on because it was going to prevent me from prioritizing my charisma if I wanted to get the most damage out of the weapon that I was using, right? But now that we're charisma capped, and maybe especially now that we're level 12 and all the weapon users are probably getting some seriously juicy stuff that's increasing their hit chance and or their damage with weapons, what if a really awesome heavy crossbow came along? Or we bought or crafted one? At this level, we could take the weapon mastery feat in the heavy crossbow so that we could push with the heavy crossbow. Simultaneously, we could take Pact of the Blade with our new invocation that we get at this level and bind that magical heavy crossbow as our pact weapon. You can do this with ranged weapons if they're magical, right? Then, since we gained a level in Warlock here at level 12, we could swap out one of our other invocations, Agonizing Blast maybe, for Devouring Blade, and suddenly, just like that, we can make 3 attacks per turn, just like we were doing with Helldritch Blast, that all did a d10 plus our Charisma modifier, just like with Helldritch Blast, and pushing, just like Helldritch Blast, but now taking advantage of the awesome magic weapon too. Undoubtedly, like raising our hit chance and or the damage that we do with our attack. This is not a must-do strategy, but I would absolutely consider it. And if you were, you might even want to prep for this a level or 2 earlier and like start swapping out some other invocations, right? To grab Thirsting Blade, Eldritch Smite, to get even more out of being a weapon user. So you could really hit the ground running as soon as you got to level 12. I'm not going to assume that we're doing that when I crunch numbers, but I'm throwing it out there as something definitely worth considering. At level 13, we get a 7th level Mystic Arcanum. And again, I'm just going to say PYF here. The spell list for 7th level spells that Warlocks have access to is not very big. And frankly, none of the spells feel like must-haves to me. Not even really Force Cage, now that it requires concentration and costs 1,500 gold every time you use it. But it's probably the one I'd still take anyways. I mean, it's still really great control if you need it. This then brings us to our next damage report. Since last check, we haven't unfortunately done a ton to raise our damage, outside of picking up that 3rd Eldritch Blast Beam. It might be different if you found an amazing magic weapon and made the swap, right? But again, not going to assume we're doing that. We have, however, picked up lots of nice defense, utility, and potential control though, and that is not nothing. But over a 4-round combat encounter here, on average, against 10 AC, we would do 91 damage per round. And against a 17 AC, it would be 89 DPR. What the crap? That's barely an increase. I feel like this build is a total roller coaster, right? We're down, we're up, we're back down. But yeah, that's the big problem with stopping spell slots from scaling on a caster, right? So much caster damage comes from increased spell slots, potentially. If they would just let us use those Mystic Arcanum to upcast existing spells if we wanted, we would have broken that century mark. Instead, compared to other DPR builds that I've done to date, that puts us kind of top of tier 2 by comparison, still a great place to be. And compared with other single class builds, well, we're still beating out all the marshals and half-casters. The sorcerer has got the edge on us here for single target damage. Yeah, sorcerer build from that video right up there. So we're down, we're up, we're down. Where is it all going to end? Let's find out. At level 14, here's some promising news. Because yeah, the very next level, we get the Fiend Warlock's most awesome ability, Hurl Through Hell. In fact, I would say that this is the best level 14 ability of any Warlock subclass. This, together with access to the Wall of Fire spell, was the main reason that I wanted to go Fiendlock for this build. So, alright, with Hurl Through Hell, once per turn, when we hit with an attack roll, any attack, you can force a charisma save, and if they fail, they go to hell. Meaning they just disappear and are incapacitated until the end of our next turn. They also take 8d10 psychic damage as long as they're not a fiend. Now, as amazing as that is, if they make their save, then nothing happens. Nada. And that's a bummer. And we can only do this once per day for free. Also a bummer. But hey, we can do it more if we want to spend a spell slot, and that is very likely worth it if there's a good chance of them failing that save. And being a charisma save, there's a pretty decent chance that most enemies fail. That said, do we just burn through all of our spell slots on trying to hurl through hell every round? If I assume a 50% chance of success, that seems a little generous to the enemy on a charisma save, but maybe not. Depends on the enemy. Maybe they have legendary saves at this level, right? We're level 14. But a 50% chance of success means we're only getting 4d10 damage on average out of this. And yet, since it's just 4d10 extra damage on top of what we're already doing, we don't have to sacrifice an action or a bonus action, right? And especially since if it works, we are just completely removing an enemy from combat for an entire round, which is some really fantastic control. I think it's worth doing, sure. We get our spell slots back on a short rest. Use them if you got them, I say. It says they're immediately shunted into the nether regions if they fail their save. So do we wait to force the save until the very last shot of our Eldritch Blast so that we can kind of get our full round of damage to them first? That's dicey. That last attack might miss, right? So in actual play, in a real encounter, this might end up being a thing where we're hitting one target and then sending them off to hell, and then picking a second target to use the rest of our Eldritch Blasts on. I can't really know what that's going to look like, and it will vary from encounter to encounter, so I'm just going to assume that we're doing full damage to a single enemy, but yeah, your mileage might and almost certainly will vary. At level 15, we get our 8th level Mystic Arcanum, and I'm going to just say PYF here, though my first two choices would probably be Befuddlement or more likely Dominate Monster. Again, our best options are control and debuff options at these higher levels. They require concentration, but they're solid. And then we get yet another Eldritch Invocation. Seems like the obvious choice here would be Witch Sight, as it's the only invocation with a level 15 prerequisite in the player's handbook, right? Just gives us true sight within a 30-foot range, which, yeah, you'll be really glad you have that when you need it. At level 16, we get another general feat, and I'm just going to say PYF here too, probably choosing from one of the ones that I've mentioned up till this point. As an aside, though, if you did switch to crossbows a few levels ago, I definitely suggest grabbing Great Weapon Master here so we can do some extra damage each hit with that crossbow. That said, Great Weapon Master has a very specific prerequisite of a 13 strength, so you'll need to plan way in advance for this, like I talked about way back at level 1, right? Sacrificing probably Constitution in order to get there. That is a very long game play, unless you're doing like a high level one-shot. That said, I suppose plenty of DMs would allow you to meet the requirements for the Great Weapon Master feat with like a potion of giant strength that you crafted from Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron. It would give us a 21 strength. Technically, you're supposed to have that 13 strength innately, right? Without any like temporary buffs before magic items, etc. But come on, this is cool. When you drink the potion, you get the benefit, but if the potion runs out, you don't. That's just dripping with flavor and fun character and story moments, I think. I'll allow it. But I'm not going to assume that we've gone that route when we crunch numbers. Finally, for us, at level 17, we get our 9th level Mystic Arcanum, and Foresight is amazing for concentration-free advantage on all of your d20 rolls for 8 hours, plus disadvantage on enemy attacks against you. That's probably the route that I'm going because I'm boring, but also because, Eldritch Blast fires 4 beams now at 17th level, and we don't have the luck points or the, assistance from our familiar to assume advantage on all of our attacks otherwise. Of course, Imprisonment is worth a look for some crazy potent shutdown. A true polymorph is hard to say no to, right? So PYF. And don't forget that we get a 5th level spell slot now too, per short rest. Hooray for more trips to hell, among other things, I suppose. But yes, at level 17, it is time for our final damage report. We have gained an additional Eldritch Blast Beam since last check, and above all, added a 50% chance for our target to take 8d10 damage and be vanished and incapacitated for a round every round thanks to Hurl Through Hell. I think I'd still spend round 1 throwing down Wall of Fire though. It'll look better for our average damage numbers and still provide some solid control and or damage depending on the shape we cast it in and how many enemies get trapped behind it. But now, averaged over a 4-round combat encounter against enemies with a 10 armor class, we would do 134 damage per round. And against an 18 AC, it would be 131 DPR. And again, that's assuming all of our damage is just being done to one target, though it could be potentially split up into 2 or maybe even 3, right? So there's definitely potential for more total damage here, whether because Wall of Fire is hitting multiple enemies, or maybe we're pushing multiple enemies through Wall of Fire on our turn if they're relatively close to it, so that we can fire a beam and push one through, then fire at a different enemy and push them, right? It's complicated, but I think this gives a good idea of what's possible anyways. And yes, these numbers look great. It's a solid increase since last check, and compared to other DPR builds that I've done to date, it's middle of tier 1 territory again, and compared to other single class builds, it's better than all of them but that sorcerer, and now the Doom Scroller Thief who had unlimited access to True Strike scrolls. But as is usually the case, there's a lot of analysis to weigh in on here, so let's get into it with some final thoughts. The tier score for this build, if you take the damage they do against all of the armor classes we calculate for at each of the 4 damage reports and just average it into one big number, we end up with 80. And that means we've got a new frontrunner for single target damage, folks, for single class builds anyways. They got off to a bit of a slow start, but boy did they scale well, despite a bit of a lull between levels 10 to 13, right? So, okay, does this mean that the Warlock is the best class in D&D for single class builds, the most powerful? I mean, not necessarily. As always, there are a lot of things to consider here. First of all, we're pretty squishy. Light armor all game, no shield spell, a D8 hit die. We've got some decent defensive buffs as a fiend lock, sure, and we are trying to stay at ranged, but as we all know, ranged helps, but it's by no means a guarantee of safety. And then there's the how well will this actually work in combat question, right? I think most of the time it'll work pretty well, but I mean, you're going to run into speedy enemies that can get far enough away from our concentration spell to where it's going to be difficult to push them back into, the tentacles or the Wall of Fire, right? Or for that matter, you'll have enemies who have blind sight, and so Hunger of Hadar doesn't give us advantage, or who can fly, or who can teleport, or who are resistant or immune to the cold or fire damage that you're trying to deal with that concentration spell. The angle where you're standing might not be right, or it might be a massive battlefield and you can't get into position to try and blast them back, or you kill the first one, but to get a second one in is going to take a while, right? Or maybe you've got a small battlefield and you can't throw down Hunger of Hadar because it's going to hurt your allies too, etc., etc., etc. But I mean, I don't know. Every build, every character has potential limitations like this. I don't think that, because there might be scenarios where this doesn't work as well, it's any reason to say this build just doesn't work. I welcome challenges and opportunities to switch up tactics and think outside the box. Use Misty Step to get into position once in a while if you need to. Concentrate on a different spell. Whether Cloud of Daggers, if it's a small room, right? Or sure, Hypnotic Pattern or Fear for massive multi-target shutdown. And that is where, I think, the true power of spellcasters lies, right? Generally, if a pure martial character runs into an issue where their main tactic isn't as effective, they don't have a lot of options to do something else that's very worthwhile. But even the Warlock, with their comparatively limited spell list, seems to have a solution to most problems. Beyond that, I think the real power of this build lies in the fact that, generally speaking, we're throwing down solid damage and solid control pretty reliably. That sorcerer build that I did, right? Sure, they had the potential for fantastic control if they wanted to sacrifice their damage for it, right? Better options for hard shutdown on the battlefield than this build had. They're a sorcerer, they got a better spell list. This build has similar hard shutdown capability, not quite as good, but still really good. But all this damage that I've been calculating for, it always came with a measure of debuffing and control potential every time. Or I guess in the case of Wall of Fire, either a bit of control or significantly more damage than I was reporting if multiple enemies decided to just brave the fire rather than spend a turn running around it, right? And that is pretty freaking incredible. They might not have the pure multi-target blasting capability of the wizard or the druid or the cleric that I built for this series, though we've got some, But when you can lead the pack in potential single target damage while simultaneously blinding, snaring, delaying, and maybe even shunting into another plane of existence, now that is one hell of a potent character, pun intended. And I'd really love to try playing them someday. And I hope you would too. But that's the build for the week. So, yeah, I had a lot of fun with this one. Gosh, I say that a lot, I know, but some are more fun than others, and this was up there. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you know that I love you. Thank you so much for watching, for supporting the channel, and for everything that you do. It means the world to me. I hope you have a great day and a fantastic week. And boy, if you don't, hang in there, okay? Don't give up. Don't give up. I hope that you will do good and be kind, and that I see you again very soon. But until then, take care. Bye. I stuck around St. Petersburg when I saw it was time for a change. Killed the Tsar and his ministers. Anastasia screamed in vain. I rode a tank, held a general's rank, when the blitzkrieg reigned and the bodies stank. Pleased to meet you, hope you guess my name. Oh yeah. But what's puzzling you is the nature of my game. I am not the world's biggest Stones fan, but Sympathy for the Devil felt thematically appropriate both for the build this week and for the times that we are currently living in. And I think kind of funny and or what's the word? And I am so grateful for. Maybe I'll wear. I love on-demand damp. The was just and against an 18 AC, it would be 131 AC.